way that, of course, this COVID-19 times have been quite hard for everybody. It has challenged internally countries very much on testing how countries can be capable of dealing with this. It has tested individuals very strongly also. But then the one which we are looking at it from the hybrid threat perspective, that is always someone from outside coming to our internal space and trying to mess it up, basically, interfere, influence, destabilize, whatever. And what we have experienced during the COVID-19 is definitely that some actors have kind of made the situation worse. That not only the virus is challenging our systems, but also deliberately actors from outside. And you mentioned that in Georgia you talk about Russia. Yes, I think a lot of disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, destabilization campaigns can be tracked to Russia. But we've also detected a lot relating to China. So Russia is not alone in this game, and that's why perhaps the whole situation is even more challenging. Well, first of all, when comparing Russia and China, the one similarity of both of them is that they are authoritarian regimes. So that needs to be remembered when we're talking about the hybrid threats, because we are always talking about the threat from authoritarian states towards states that are either democratic or democratization process is ongoing. And specifically those countries who are in democratization process are even more vulnerable. Yeah. So China did change approximately from 2012 onwards when Xi came to power. So their kind of way of going beyond Chinese borders, coming more and more perhaps closer to those things that we've used to see from Russia's side, and specifically to the disinformation domain.
And if I may comment, I think that there's also one point here which is worth mentioning, is that sometimes the fertile ground is required. Sometimes their activities actually exacerbating or emphasizing or somehow wakening up the existing situation or the existing tensions within societies and within states and state structures. And I think also one point here is that trust is very much questioned in all this influencing. Is it trust to the health system, trust to authorities and their messaging, and that the messaging that they are having would reflect the credible politics in this field, not only in this field, but also in general. And this is what the authoritarian countries are taking advantage of.
Yes,
and coming, if I also made, sorry, your point about this COVID-19. So this is a perfect opportunity to exactly push the buttons on the trust. Yes. So question how well the authorities are doing, all kind of, you mentioned the anti-vaccine campaigns and things like that. So you can kind of definitely use all of this to push the buttons so that the authorities and the people would go kind of further apart, and also different groups among the civil society. So what more you can do the cleavages in the between, wedges here and there, the more you can destabilize the state. So if you mean that what is Russia's attitude towards Finland and Finnish possible membership in a NATO? So I suppose in the principle level, or in theory, it's exactly the same than in Georgia's. Yes. They're not liking the idea that Finland would join it. But the approach is very different. But that is also because we are two very different states with different history, with the Russian different cultural backgrounds. So that would be very stupid of Russia if it would do the same things that it does in Georgia, try to do it in Finland, or the other way around, I think. So in that way, quite often we see, or most of the cases, we actually see that Russia has very tailor-made approach. Yeah. So each country taking into consideration that background and then finding possibly the vulnerabilities or sensitiveness and then trying to use that or push it in the way that it would turn towards their own advantage. It doesn't always work. Not in case of Georgia, as far as I know. You know, sometimes if you do push too far, it has a counterproductive way. And the same, I have to say, in Finland also. I think they, for example, they learned their lesson in the way that every time Russia came very, very strongly out and said, we do not want Finland to join NATO, and almost threatened, the support for NATO membership started to go up. So now they are much more careful about it, softer approach, kind of
different ways,
trying to sugarcoat it almost a little bit, and that works much better. So so this is the thing, that they know their neighbors, and then they work in that framework.
As far as Georgia's EU membership is concerned, of course, EU is about reforms. EU is about resilience, and it's about recovery also, these 3 R's that are being repeated. Reforms mean that the society is ready to fulfill the requirements that the EU membership has. And I think this is something that is also in the scope of any country that is trying to influence from outside, is that they are doing the mapping also. That this is why this kind of intellectual honesty also domestically is vital, that you know where your vulnerabilities are, and you actively fight to make those vulnerabilities your strengths, or at least neutralize them, because that is cutting the wings of any outside influencing more than anything else. And that this is what resilience is all about. It's about doing your own homework and being able to as I say, reform your society also in the fields that you might not feel very likable. Well, that created the polarization of society, has created a very problematic situation, in particular for Georgians themselves. And of course, EU is not there to make peace. EU is not there to moderate anything. Charles Michel facilitated an agreement which was a domestic agreement between the parties to make sure, or to help the political parties to join in the parliament, to work as a parliamentarian democracy, as Georgia is. That proved to be working to a point. But of course, the approaching local elections had their element in that settlement, or in that document, and I'm sure that has the impact that at the moment I don't think anybody would dare to comment your question really, but just to see that political stability is the #1 thing that EU is all about. And political stability means that all parties are willing to take part in the parliamentarian development and democracy, because that's what democracy is all about.
So let's start, first of all, a slight perhaps misunderstanding relating to Gerasimov doctrine. So 2013 Gerasimov speech that then was published was not what we call hybrid warfare, in fact. He was then talking about the modern warfare to his quite old-fashioned stuff. And that's a very military based approach. But when we're talking about the hybrid threats, we are talking more about the way how authoritarian states combine kind of civil military means in a subtle, quite often covert way, trying to be 2 steps ahead, so that they would get the influence, basically, and control. So this is what we mean by that. And there is a slight misunderstanding relating to the Gerasimov doctrine. Then the second thing is, yes, Russia has been very active in different places. Case studies after case studies, what we've kind of made, there are a lot of evidence of Russian involvement, sometimes more successful than other times. And also how you measure success, of course, is a very difficult thing. But I think success in this case is already that they managed to mess up. So even if they don't necessarily get their results, but if they have penetrated a parliamentary system or hacked a party's emails or manage to create a confusion in Facebook with different things, using sometimes bots or not even a real people, or then the troll factory in St. Petersburg. All of these are known facts. They cannot be said that this is not happening. It is happening. So we know that, and all the time we've been more and more prepared. And perhaps the fact that they have been called out is already to show that we are better prepared than we have been. And also the legal frameworks have been adjusted, the different directives relating to EU framework, for example. There is a lot of improvement has been happening. Of course, the hybrid threat activity is very creative.
Yes.
So it's
changed everything.
It changes constantly.
Yes.
When something has happened one time, it might not happen the second time as such. So this is a little bit of cat and mouse game all the time. But I think the awareness has been kind of raised a lot. And a lot of work all the time has been made to get better. But when it comes to democracies, I think the development is the key. Dynamic development also. You never can say, okay, now this is ready, this is done. It is a constant kind of renewing.
And that also requires resources, that also requires human resources, this awareness, yes, and this intellectual resources, but also legislative base for that. Yes. And in particular, the awareness of the people, that you can actually identify the situations where you have been threatened, because I mean, not everything that Russia is doing. There's also many things that is relatively normal. Yes. Not to talk about China. I mean, this is also something that we sometimes become also blinded by the overt activities, the things that we see. And then we don't realize that there's a lot below the surface, and below the things that are going on below the surface are actually perhaps even more dangerous than the ones that we can actually see. But EU is getting a lot better in this, and I think the Hybrid Centre of Excellence has done a great deal in particularly this, of making this issue visible.
One small thing, because we agree on this one, but from the small country's perspective, and if you specifically think of from the hybrid threat perspective kind of thing, is that disagree all you like inside of your four walls, but when you go out, show a united front. That's very important in the way that, and you have to disagree, of course, and exchange opinions, but to get the situational awareness as close as possible, and at least find the way how you can show the unity. When you look at it, and I have to look at it from the hybrid threat perspective now, so I'm not taking into climate change or anything like that into the picture, is really kind of how the security has changed, and how do we kind of analyze what is peace and what is war. Because if we are not seeing perhaps the threat there where it is, and if we see the threat where it isn't, then we are in a problem. And also the fact that if we are not able to anticipate a potential threat. And I think this is one of the issues relating to hybrid threats and those actors that are using it. And we've already mentioned here Russia and China, authoritarian states which has capability of acting outside of their own borders. So if we are not really seeing that, then I think that is the big threat, because one of the key aspects on hybrid threat is that they are pushing us to make decisions which are harmful for ourselves and undermine our own democracy. And this, if we are not careful, we might be doing ourselves. And if we erode our own democracy, which is our strength also, then that's a huge threat. And I would actually say that from the hybrid threat perspective, that is the biggest threat we are facing now.
And that is basically also based on the increasing dividing lines within the societies. The technological development has left many people without their traditional jobs and their know-how, and this is also building gaps between generations, between also genders, between countryside and city people. And I think that the politicians have a great problem in addressing these people with the same language, which means that you will have polarized party structures and party ideologies, and which is underlining the need to have the ideologies, to have a value-based debate also, because I mean this is basically a surface thing in the sense that if your old job dies, then you can be trained for another one, which is most likely to be more interesting and more rewarding and better paid. So this is about political systems, and these trends we can see within the societies in Europe. In of course, the United States is a prime example of that. And this is why politicians also need to be smart, in the sense that not to exacerbate these dividing lines, but rather build bridges across these lines, because that is basically the sustainable politics.
Okay, thank you a lot. I think we're done here. Thank you one more time for hosting us, and thank you for your time.